Welcome to week 6, which of all of the weeks may be one of the most socially of the social psychology topics. Here we'll be talking about the influence of genetics or biology and the influence of the environment, our social world that we live in. I will go over week 5 activity feedback, and then I'll do a brief overview of modules 12 and 13, which begin our social influence section. Then I will also review activities for week 6. As far as the announcements, nothing too serious. We are approximately halfway through, so part of the week 6 activities will include a mid-course evaluation where I would encourage you to let me know what's working for you, what's not working for you, what you like, what you don't like. Each class kind of has its own personality, and so it's great to get some feedback from each of you to find out how things are going and help me mold the class to your needs and your preferences while you still have a chance, while I still have a chance to make some changes if I need to. So beginning with week 5 activity feedback, I read through your online posts and I wanted to first of all just comment on your excellent spelling and grammar. You're one of the best classes that I've ever had as far as spelling and grammar, and I would just like to let you know how much I appreciate that. It makes reading it so much easier and it makes you well presented, so you come off as more intelligent. So keep up the great work. And of course, you can't come off as being intelligent without being somewhat intelligent or very intelligent, so that's also a credit to you. Do remember to include a reference to a concept from the readings. It doesn't have to be one of the readings from this past week. It can be any reading that you think might apply. I would actually encourage you to go back through all the previous readings and see if there's something that you think fits the best to whatever topic you're talking about or the scenario that you're talking about in your online post. Psychology isn't necessarily formed by little chunks of information. It's definitely something that can be applied to a wide range of different experiences and behaviors. So definitely look beyond just the current week's worth of readings. For the second part of the question, I mentioned comparing your interview experience with your experience that you had maybe with friends or in the classroom, something that's more of a day-to-day type experience, comparing that to interviews for grad school and GPA scores, GRE scores, that kind of thing. I definitely wasn't expecting you all to have had experience with graduate school interviews. A lot of you did a great job comparing those, though. Your interpretations of the two comparisons between interviews and more long-term behavioral metrics were all a little bit different, and I thought you all did a great job. It's definitely indicative of how psychological concepts can be applied to everyday type experiences. There are typically multiple interpretations of everyday experiences, things like having an interview, and how that compares to a different kind of assessment. So again, keep up the good work. You're doing a great job with your critical thinking skills. Some of my questions might seem somewhat fuzzy, a bit open to interpretation, and that's very intentional. If you can find the answer to a fuzzy question or an answer to a fuzzy question, you're in great shape for the kind of problems that you'll be addressing, whether you go on to graduate school or a job after college. The real world is much less black and white than most of your classes would lead you to believe, and than most of your experiences would lead you to believe so far. So as always, if you need any clarifications, don't hesitate to ask. I'm here as a resource for you, and I'd be happy to give you more context if you would like. And great job with quiz 4. There were no frequently missed questions. So again, keep up the good work there. For the APA formatted references list, again, this was one of the best group of references lists that I've ever reviewed. I thought you had excellent first drafts, beautiful hanging indents. That tends to be the thing that trips most students up. Do check out the individual comments and suggestions for edits that I included in your drafts. I uploaded files for each of your groups to review, and that should be uploaded to each of your individual profiles, so not just the person who submitted will be able to see it. So check those out for future drafts. Do incorporate changes into future drafts because that will be part of the assessment in the future. And be sure to remove the extra space after the paragraph. I think I mentioned this in one of the earlier weeks. The newest version of Word adds an extra space. I want to say it's like not quite 12 point, it's like a 10 point space after each paragraph. So if you had individual lines, it would almost look double spaced, but it ends up throwing off the format of regular double spaced. Things like reference lists. So be sure that you take that out for your final product. And as I mentioned, I think attach your revisions for your references list to the proposal outline that you'll be submitting in a couple weeks, in week 7. So moving on to social influence. Social influence studies how people influence and relate to each other. And many of you said that the topic that you were most interested in was in this section, one of the ones in this section, so this will be a fun one. Module 12 fits into the social influence section because it talks about how genes and environmental factors influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. Universal behaviors that define human nature arise from our biological similarity. We may be able to identify where our ancestors came from, whether they're from Ireland, Madagascar, Japan, or all of the above, but there's substantial evidence to suggest that the human race originated on the continent of Africa. And because we originated from the same place, we are so much more similar than we are different. Module 12 discusses evolutionary psychology, which is the combination of the study of evolution and the study of human thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Like social psychology, evolutionary psychology incorporates both genetics, like our DNA, and culture, the social environment, into explanations for why we are how we are. But just because you have a gene associated with a condition doesn't mean that you will inevitably get that condition. So like the tumor suppressin gene, mutations in the tumor suppression gene are associated with cancer, but just because you have a mutated tumor suppression gene, that doesn't guarantee that you'll have cancer. They call it gene expression. The gene can become triggered by some experience in the social environment, but it isn't always triggered. In another example, the book talks about how depression can be triggered by a stressful event. You'd have to have both the gene for depression and experience the stressful event in order to experience depression, in order for the gene to be expressed. Although we're incredibly similar genetically, the social environments that we live in, our culture's social norms, do influence our behavior. And there are a lot of similarities in social norms across cultures, but there are also some differences. For example, when Simba started spending time with a meerkat and a warthog in the movie The Lion King, he learned that, at least in the movie, they are also social creatures, like lions, and enjoy spending time with other animals. And just as Simba branched out and tried new foods when he experienced the meerkat and warthog norm of eating grubs, which are actually beetle larvae, humans can also experience cultural differences when they travel. The book discusses different social norms or cultural expectations for appropriate behavior across various cultures, and it also discusses some far-reaching similarities across cultures. So overall, it's important to remember that although there are some differences, we are much more similar than we are different. Module 13 fits into the social influence section because it talks about how social constructs like gender influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. Gender is a social construct because our culture's social norms include prescribed gender roles. This could include behavioral norms, like how we're expected to behave or what behavior is acceptable, and appearance norms, what we're expected to look like or what clothing is acceptable for men and women. For example, social norms allow men more latitude with aggression than women. There are different standards for what's considered appropriate. Think of the saying, boys will be boys. It's often used to justify or excuse or validate boys' aggressive behavior, and the acceptable level for aggressiveness in girls is culturally lower than it is in boys. Many studies and many psychology textbooks talk about gender differences, and it makes it seem like men and women are quite different. And these overlapping normal curves, or the normal distributions, reflect how these discussions can seem. So if you think of one curve representing one gender and another curve representing another gender, it makes it seem like there's very little overlap. So this section here represents the overlap between the two. And this is, of course, assuming that there are only two genders, men and women. In reality, just like the size of differences in cultural norms between cultures, men and women are also much more similar than they are different. There's way more overlap than there is difference. So in this image on the right here, this is actually representative of a typical difference for men and women in social psychology. So you can see this entire middle section here is the overlap. This is how similar men and women are, whereas these tiny little slices on the side represent the degree of difference between men and women. It's difficult to parse out the proportion of influence from genetics and the environment when you're looking at gendered behavior. Gendered behavior is behavior that's consistent with social norms for gender, or inconsistent with social norms for gender. One commonly studied gender difference is in the realm of aggression, which is defined as behavior that intends to hurt another person. It's important to differentiate between different kinds of hurt because those are associated with different kinds of aggression. So you can hurt someone physically, emotionally, or relationally. Most of us are familiar with the concept of physical aggression, which is behavior with the intent to physically harm someone. The movie Mean Girls displays relational aggression, which is aggression intended to damage other people's relationships. Gender differences in aggression are somewhat dependent upon the type of aggression you're measuring and who the target of the aggression is. The textbook discusses gender differences also in sexuality and mating preferences. I have posted an article on Scholar by Alexander and Fisher from 2003 that examines some types of social influence on participants' reports of their own sexuality. It compares men and women's reports of sexuality in 3 different conditions, one of which is the bogus pipeline, which is represented by this image here. The bogus pipeline is an approach that social psychologists use in the research lab that makes it seem like it's a lie detector, but it's bogus because it doesn't actually have the power to detect lies. It's not functional. It's not actually reading any kind of electromagnetic readings from people. But since it appears to function like a lie detector, participants are under the impression that anything that they say that's not true will be discovered. So as you read the article, think about how you would react to each of those 3 situations or 3 conditions that are described in the article. So do you think your behavior would be similar to the participants, or do you think it would be different, and how so? So in the next video, I will briefly go over the activities for week 6, and I will also do a demonstration of how to format an APA table.